as a writer. Um, I will. Hello again.
We're able to hear you better.
Okay.
Yeah, hi again.
Let's first introduce ourselves as the panel, and then I would like to find out sort of what stage writing everybody is at.
Okay, well, my name's Lou Antonelli. I'm a part-time writer. I'm a full-time journalist in Texas. So I primarily worked in short fiction. Actually, I've had short fiction published. I've had 92 stories published in 12 years. As a result of that, I've had 3 collections published over the years. The most recent one was The Clock Struck None. It was published by Fantastic Books last year. Got a good review in Analog. As a result of my experience in breaking into the field a decade ago with Gardner Dozois's Asimovs, and I realized editors today don't do that anymore, give you that kind of feedback that Gardner Dozois did. I was the last author that he purchased before he retired. Make of that what you will. I saved his correspondence. I sent him 16 stories in a year and a half, and I realized since it's becoming a part of history, I compiled them, and then the stories, as they were ultimately published in other venues after being rewritten into a book, Letters from Gardner, which is a Hugo nominee for Best Related Work this year. So this is probably really pertinent to the subject of this panel. It sounds self-promoting, but it is.
And I'm Ellie Collins. I primarily work in film and television, but this year I released the first book in my urban fantasy series, Empire Valley, which I'm doing through an independent publishing group. So I know more of the having to do it all yourself type aspect in the trial by fire.
I'm Paula Jordan. I have written one thing and another for most of my life. I have published 3 short stories in Analog, and I'm currently working on my first real novel. So that's where I am. Show of hands, is everybody in the room currently writing? Okay, some are coming along more slowly than others, perhaps. Is anybody in here published? Okay, so we have
self-published.
Self-published and still published.
Self-published.
Okay, so we have a pretty good range in there. Is some of you trying to publish and not yet succeeded? Yes. Okay. The way I'd like to do this is I'll have some questions for the panel first, and if those questions generate a question in your mind, please raise your hand and we'll deal with it. This can be very interactive, I hope. And then afterwards we'll have a nice long time for audience questions. Well, before I start with the panel, does anybody have a burning question you really want to ask right now before we go any further? Nope? Okay. When you first started writing, what was your biggest problem? And did you find help with it? And what was that? Do you have a sense of what was the thing you struggled with the most when you first started?
Well, the funny thing is, I had my first published story when I was 12, but it was a newspaper article. I went into journalism. I loved reading science fiction, but because of local circumstances, like the local newspaper publisher was the merit badge counselor for Scouts, I ended up being drawn into journalism. So I learned, there's a saying you have to write 1,000,000 words before you really know how to write. Yeah, my 1,000,000 words of shit were in newspapers. The first time I submitted a story for publication, a speculative fiction thing, the first thing the editor said was, "You seem to have skipped the novice stage." All my novice stuff was in journalism. I started writing for submission as an SF writer when I was 42, so at that point I knew how to write. Now, the funny thing is, the first problem I had in writing journalism was something that I ended up curing that turned out to be good for speculative fiction many years later, which the hardest thing for a lot of people to learn in journalism is how to get the dialogue and the reporting done accurately of quoting people. Quotes, are difficult. One time I sprained my arm and someone said, "What happened?" I said, "I sprained my arm pulling a quote out of context." But therefore, by the time I started writing speculative fiction when I was in my 40s, I knew how to write dialogue real well, and that proved to be my strong suit. The story I sold to Gardner Dozois Asimovs is a monologue. It's a first person monologue, and it worked because I could do that. So I'd recommend, you know, if you get feedback on that, that's a good thing to master. I mastered it automatically because of my line of work. It was kind of unfair, but it worked for me.
For me, I started out doing NaNoWriMo because I had a night job and just needed something to pass the month of November, which is why I'm repping my NaNoWriMo. This is from the year that I finished my series. And so it was just to pass the time, but...
Excuse me, does everybody know what NaNoWriMo is?
Oh yeah, sorry. NaNoWriMo is National Novel Writing Month, where for the month of November, you strive to write 50,000 words, which is the technical size of a novel. And a lot of it's just keep writing, don't edit yourself, you just write straight through the month. And that was really difficult, but the main struggle for me was coming from film and television. I'm used to the dialogue, creating the scene, and then the set decorators create the setting for me. So I had a lot of difficulty with learning how to describe scenes instead of just building them.
Did you have somebody help you out with that? Or
Yes, I utilized, because it was NaNoWriMo and I wanted that group of support, I created a Facebook group of some trusted friends who were writers that as I would finish a chapter, I would put it up on the group and they would say, well, I see what you mean about this, but maybe talk more about, you know, what makes the wallpaper crappy. Talk more about how cold it is outside. And they would pick the points where I should elaborate more and really encouraged me to describe what I could see visually.
Since there are just the three of us, I'm going to pretend I'm a speaking panelist too. My worst problem, I wrote poetry for a long time, and I wrote various kinds of technical and public relations stuff for a long time. So when it came to writing stories, I had a problem with plots. Where does the plot come from? And I had very great help in that from what's Mike Stackpole? Is that his first name? Mike? I thought so. I was afraid I'd lost it. He has he had a course that I ordered with him actually, and he informed me that plot comes from your characters, which I always have enjoyed characters. That was not a problem. It's listening to the characters that was the problem. I learned that if you design your character in enough detail and you have a fundamental plot idea, if you introduce your characters to the plot and vice versa and see how they would react under those circumstances, then you begin to have meaningful action, meaningful logical action if your characters are created with a logical personality, and they will interact just as human beings do in a way. One will say one thing, one will say, no, I disagree, or we need to do it that way. But you have interactions when you have well-defined characters. And I found that very useful.
Right along, they write themselves.
That's right. If some of them too much.
Some of them take the plot away from you, and.
But I think you need to listen to them.
Oh yeah.
You need to
So far we've been talking about the craft of writing. Should we discuss some of the practical aspects of submitting?
Submitting. Well.
Submitting was a nightmare.
Yeah.
It was.